Now, if we kind of go to the flip side of it and we go, what does this mean for Trey Lance's development? Is this on Kyle Shanahan for hurting him? Is Trey Lance going to be a bust? Because, like, of course, you're going to see a bunch of that throughout NFL media. Oh, look at this, Trey Lance. It didn't work. It's over. And like you said, Aiden, this is his fourth game, and people have already decided that Trey Lance is done. Now, I mentioned it a little bit before. If you are going to have a quarterback that plays 4 or 5 games in the span of 3 seasons or 4 years, give or take, that is super hard to develop a quarterback like that. Now, I've also seen some stuff where it's like, look at Kyle. Kyle did this, fire Kyle because Kyle screwed up Trey Lance. Kyle didn't develop Trey Lance. This isn't all on Kyle. Now, you can look at the play calls. You can go, Kyle's running Trey Lance up the middle in some physical plays too often. I agree with that. I think that's a fair take. But let's not look at this and go like, oh, this is on Kyle. Kyle's job is to try to make this offense work, try to win games. Now, Trey Lance was struggling in a lot of the aspects of the offense where they couldn't sit back and just throw quick hitters. Immediately, Jimmy Garoppolo comes in and the passing game is better. Why? Because Jimmy Garoppolo is experienced in the system. Jimmy Garoppolo can get the ball out very fast. Trey Lance was not doing that. So they were having to rely on his legs on this power like rushing offense to be able to do that stuff. And I think a lot of people are looking at like, oh, this is Kyle's fault. I don't want to say it's not like Kyle's not to blame at all, but I think people are just using Kyle as a scapegoat. Let's look at, okay, what about Trey Lance's performance? He's young, he's developing, but he's not playing at a high enough level for them to be able to move the football to win games without relying on his legs, on his physical running style. Would you agree with that, Aiden? Like they need him to do that?
Yes.
Yeah. And then we look and we go, okay, well, what about the draft pick? You trade all those picks. First of all, I want to say something really quick. Everyone freaking out like, oh, this is the worst trade, blah, 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 blah. If Trey Lance is a bust and this year and next year, the Niners make the playoffs and have deep playoff runs with Jimmy Garoppolo, those picks don't mean all that much. And in 5 years, we won't even really look at it as that big of a deal in the 49ers situation. So I think that is being completely overblown the exact same way that it was overblown for the Rams when they traded like 4 consecutive first rounders. And then, oh yeah, they won a Super Bowl. Check that out. How amazing. But it's also, if we're going to put blame on like how this situation has played out up to this point, I think it's more on John Lynch and the front office in terms of drafting a project quarterback when they do not have a clear enough plan of how they're going to make it work. And there were a lot of question marks. And I also want to say, like, I'm not like being like, oh, this is all on John Lynch or this is all on Kyle Shanahan. But I'm saying as a collective unit, it is way more reasonable, in my opinion, to say this is partially on Kyle, partially John / front office, and partially on Trey in terms of his performance than it is on just Kyle alone. Now, the reason that it's going to be a lot of it's going to be blamed on Kyle is because of the RG3 situation. So I get it. Like, I get that everyone is upset because he is hurt, but I don't know what Kyle's supposed to do in terms of, and this was said by John Middlecoff on his podcast. What do you want Kyle to do? Go out there and just have Trey start trying to rip deep outs and plays across the middle that he's not going to hit and just go 3 and out every time? Like, no, they need him to be able to do that. They need a dynamic running offense. Up to that point, I think it was 12 carries in the game, or maybe it was 16, I think. And I think it was 12 carries. And 3 had gone, I think it was 3 had gone to Debo, Trey, Wilson, and then Davis Price. So like it was split evenly. Like they're running the ball in such unique ways and they're doing such interesting stuff with their rushing attack. They had to do that because Trey was going to struggle to consistently sit in the pocket and just hit plays across the middle, hit these easy throws. Does that mean he's going to always struggle in that? No. But it does take time. And like I haven't heard someone that like really, really knows football well that has looked at this and gone, this is all on Kyle. I have yet to see one person that has worked in an NFL like room or is not like a media personality opposed to like a football guy that has looked at this and said, this is on Kyle. I have yet to see one person say that. I don't know if you have, Aiden, but I just think it's kind of outrageous to be like, this is all on Kyle. Is it partially on Kyle? Yeah, I think it is partially on Kyle. I don't want them running the quarterback power as much as they have been. And you were watching the game and you're going, inevitably he's going to get hurt. And then guess what? He shatters his ankle. So like, I get it, but it's also not just on Kyle. And saying, oh, it's on Kyle, fire Kyle is an absurd take. And you're really just using him as a scapegoat, in my opinion.
I actually I'm gonna disagree a little bit. I don't think really anybody deserves any sort of blame. If I'm Kyle, I'd probably do the same thing. I run quarterback power is part of why you picked Lance. And you see Josh Allen do it in Buffalo now for forever. Cam obviously had some injuries, but a lot of that was sacks. And the RG3 thing, like he got hurt the first time, the really bad time when he was like picking up a fumbled snap. It wasn't like he was running and it was a designed play. Like and even this Lance play, like he the same thing could have happened on a scramble, same thing could have happened on a sack. It's I actually have zero problem with Kyle running that many quarterback powers. In hindsight, it doesn't look great. I think that that's fair. But like that's part of the reason that you moved up to get this guy so you could use his legs. It's I mean, it's not like he was running the ball 25 times a game. But I think even like prime Lance, if we ever get to that, I'd love to see him run some quarterback powers. I think he should run the ball eight to 10 times a game. Because as we saw on that 3rd and 6, like the Seahawks were not ready for a quarterback power on sort of an important play where they picked up the first down, and you could see how that made a positive impact on the effect of the game. And that's something that Jimmy's best skill is his quarterback sneaking, but he is not a running quarterback.
Well, real
Um,
quick, what about the one last week against the Bears? What was it, 3rd and 13, and Lance goes
yes,
and picks it up?
exactly. So, um, I like I think a lot of that is people reacting and thinking back to this RG3 thing and really not knowing what they're talking about. These situations are different, and the way the Washington thing ended wasn't really because of the RG3 injury. It was because of the owner and him kind of abusing Kyle's dad, and that relationship souring more than anything on the field. So I mean, you talked about the front office potentially not having a clear enough plan. I think that for some at some level could be true, but even with the most clear possible plan, like it was going to look like this for the first couple weeks anyway. Like nothing surprised me in a negative way over these first couple weeks. It was pretty much exactly what I expected. Some ups, some downs. Ceiling is higher, floor is definitely lower, but you're going to deal with the growing pains because even if it's not this year, next year, the year after, you're a better team moving forward. And I think a lot of people look at this 49ers roster, and I think it's fair. It's a tough give and take. Do you want to sacrifice a year where you have a Super Bowl contending defense to develop your rookie basically quarterback? Um, the Niners decided it was worth the risk. And now they're kind of forced to go back to this last year sort of approach where you got a guy who knows he's probably gone at the end of this year. And there's pros to that. I think that we both have said that the Niners are better right now, and I think that this gives them a much higher chance of just making the playoffs. Um, Obviously, with Lance, I think that if they make the playoffs, they could make the Super Bowl. And with Jimmy, while that's possible, I think the chances of that are lower. And Vegas agrees. The Niners line to win the Super Bowl went from I think plus 1,600 before the injury to plus 2,000 after. So I think that should say something. But I mean, I just think it's a like football injuries are going to happen. It's just kind of a wrong place, wrong time kind of thing. But for those saying you should never run the quarterback, whose career would you rather have, Cam Newton or Philip Rivers? I think everybody would pretty much say you'd rather have Cam MVP. Neither won a Super Bowl, but it's part of what makes a guy like that so good. So you should never take that completely out of your playbook, and you should leverage the reason why you moved up to this guy at 3. If Kyle just wanted a guy to stand in there and make passes and that's it, he wouldn't have said those things that he said about Josh Allen a couple years ago, and they would have just picked Mac Jones at 12 probably. So I think a lot of it is blown out of proportion, and a lot of it is people not really knowing what they're talking about.
dude, and I like that you bring this stuff up too, but also like, and then you heard Kyle's presser where he's like, yeah, it was a quarterback option. He took it, and you see guys do this all the time. But he said like, you guys should probably watch some other teams, which definitely frustrated some people. And people were like, oh, Kyle is acting like a child and all this stuff, dude. What do you want him to say? Yeah, I ran my quarterback into the ground. Like, no, like we knew that was the plan with Trey. And I think for me, my personal thought is I think I would like to see them do it a little bit less. I thought they were doing it quite a bit, but I also understand why they were doing it. And that's why I brought up the front office questions of like, hey, you probably shouldn't have your quarterback be running this much power. Now, one thing that is not getting talked about this whole situation is, and this is not on Kyle, this is not on the 49ers, this is more on Trey anyone else. Trey doesn't avoid contact. You know why Lamar Jackson doesn't get hurt on running plays? Because he never gets hit cleanly. No one ever rolls on him. He's able to drop really quick. Justin Fields basically said after the game, like, yeah, I got to get Trey like my guy that can teach him how to slide because he doesn't know how to slide. He doesn't slide. He just runs into guys. And so that's another aspect of it. Like, look at how he gets hurt. He doesn't get hurt because he gets hit or whatever. He gets hurt because someone rolls on him and all the weight goes onto his leg. I mean, that's at least what it looked like when they showed the replay. Like, it looks like he doesn't get necessarily break his leg on impact, but it's when he gets turned and like rolled over. That's like all the like maybe outside of Josh Allen, because Josh Allen doesn't really slide that much either, in all honesty. But a lot of the guys that run, Kyler Murray, and they're quicker. Granted, they are quicker. Lamar Jackson, those guys, but they're able to get down. They're able to drop, to not necessarily avoid contact altogether, but avoid hard contact, avoid weight falling on their legs. Justin Fields, we saw it on Sunday Night Football. He threw for 70 yards, but he made a couple nice plays on it with his legs. Never gets like destroyed, like he's always avoiding a lot of contact. So that's something that I thought Trey was going to work on a little bit more in the offseason. Because last year when we saw him come out and there was a lot of hard contact, it was like, dude, this is not sustainable at all. Like, you got to learn how to drop. You have to learn how to slide. Another thing, when you do learn how to slide and you do learn how to drop at the right time, say you run one of those plays and you drop 2 yards before the first down on 2nd and 8, right? You pick up 6 and you slide, and then the defender comes in and hits you. That's 15 yards. How often do we see that in today's NFL? So like, there are so many more benefits of being able to drop down and do that. And quarterback power, you can still do the same thing. The Ravens run so much quarterback power with Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson has been hurt one time so far. This is what, his year 4, year 5, right? And it was on a passing play where both of his tackles were out and someone clipped his ankle and he had a little like ankle sprain. It wasn't a significant injury. Lamar runs that like more than any other player, and he's still yet to have a significant injury on a rushing play. So you got to look at it on style. You got to look at it a lot more than just like, oh, Kyle killed his quarterback, because I don't think that's fair at all. And Aiden, I like that you kind of brought up of like, yeah, like of course they're going to use his legs. That's part of his game. I like the Cam Newton comparison. And I think part of that, like, yeah, Cam Newton is a guy like not a super long shelf life at quarterback. But Cam Newton also didn't develop enough as a passer as that went on. And that's part of the reason that they couldn't ever get away from that aspect of Cam's game. So I think if you look at Trey, and that's why ultimately it sucks so much, because like now have way larger question marks about Trey's overall development because of the lack of games played over these past 3 seasons. And that's where I'm concerned about. But yeah, I don't think that we can look at this and go, this is Kyle's fault. And if anyone listening thinks that this is Kyle's fault, like, give me a reasonable answer for why it's Kyle's fault specifically, besides being like, you can't run quarterback power, because teams run quarterback power all the time and they do not have the same issues. Like, they really don't. I did see that someone said that like Trey Lance was on pace to have like way more rushing attempts than Josh Allen has ever had. Trey Lance is also taking off on passing plays way more than Josh Allen does. And we are a game and 10 minutes into the season. We are not at the halfway point where that projection really matters all that much at this point. Like, we're just kind of guessing right now.
I don't know if that's even right, because Josh had 15 carries in week 1 and Trey only had 13. So I don't really know if that's right.
I also think it was like over like the Josh Allen's career high in prior
Ah,
seasons. Yeah.
I see. Okay. Well, I mean, I don't know. It's one of those things where like it sucks that it happened, but I don't think you spend time pointing the finger on whose fault it was, and it's very strange to me. Like everybody should feel bad for the kid. Does raise some question marks about his development going forward, but I mean, you could look at this like a negative, or you could look at it like a positive. He gets a whole nother year to really learn this whole system, and while he does need the game reps, I think we should expect him to be better next year than we saw him this year. Stuff should slow down a little bit more. So I don't know. It's tough, but
Dude,
um,
I love that you say that because one of my friends who's a Bills fan who watched Josh Allen turn into Josh Allen, he goes and I hung out with him yesterday after the whole Niners game and everything. And he goes, dude, I'm gonna be honest with you. I think that this might, and he goes, of course, we don't know yet, but he goes, I think this actually might be kind of a blessing in disguise. He goes, obviously, terrible for Trey, sucks. And there's big time question marks about his development, but he goes, I don't think he was ready at this point, which guess what, guys? That is a fair take. Like Trey Lance is the rawest quarterback ever drafted in the history of the NFL. We've talked about this before. Rawest ever. And he goes, look, man, you get Jimmy, you're probably getting better this year. And Trey does get to do a lot of film work, a lot of stuff like that, where, we don't know how it's going to look yet. We're just projecting. But he might come in next year and look significantly better, and the game speed might be there a little bit higher, where we go, oh, wow, like this actually allowed him to kind of sit behind 2 years. And there are guys that have sit behind 2 years. We know Rodgers sat for a long time, and his career played out pretty fine in terms of how he ended up turning out. Trey's also still only 22 years old. Like we talked about the rookie contract, that is a big like iffy thing. If Trey's worth a massive contract, then you're happy that you have Trey Lance because he's worth a massive contract. So I think in terms of development, like I think it does overall hurt, and it could be detrimental, but it could also be something where you look back and we go, well, the Niners were actually better in 2022, and then in 2023, maybe it wasn't necessarily like Trey didn't have all that year to get those game reps and get to the point where he would be at in 2023, but they were so much better in 2022 that 2023 it was like his first like year of like getting that experience, and he was good enough where they were still winning games, and it was like a much better thing. So I obviously don't. I don't think pointing. I think you're exactly right. I don't think pointing fingers really does anything at this point. Like I think it's just kind of like an exercise, like of like, oh, it's Kyle's fault. Like I said, I still have not heard someone that really understands football being like, oh, this is Kyle's fault. This is why. Can you be upset that he got hurt? Of course, I'm upset that he got hurt. I think we're all upset that he got hurt. Um, but it's just like I don't know, man. I don't think that we can solely blame Kyle. I think if you're like, hey, I don't like that they ran too much quarterback power, that's fair. But the reason they're running quarterback power is because they had to move the football to win games. And they were not going to do that without running the football up the middle as much as they were, in my opinion.
does
Is it
any
bad?
coach does any coach get more like fire this coach when things go bad than Kyle? Because there was talk to fire Kyle last year, like a little bit before Thanksgiving, and the Niners turned it around, and made the NFC Championship. Like I feel like this dude gets so much hate, and a lot of it's because of that 28-3 Super Bowl and then the Chiefs Super Bowl. It's so strange because he's done such a good job with this roster, with this team, and I still think he's one of the best play callers in the entire league. It's isn't that weird? Like we're not going to get anybody better on the open market. And I mean, honestly, like I think that you made a very good point about Lance, and going into next year could be much slower. And hopefully, fingers crossed. I think you and I both hope that this is the last year of Jimmy Garoppolo. He won't have Jimmy breathing down his neck. There won't be media guys being like, "Oh, when is Jimmy going to play? When is Jimmy going to play? When is Jimmy going to play?" It'll move to should they have kept Jimmy, but if he plays well, like even that'll shut up, and there'll be less, I guess, constant attention on him, and he'll just be able to go out there and play. Because at the NFL at its most basic, it's really just a game, and sometimes you can make things bigger than they are, and I don't know if that's something that Trey did. But I think that that's only another positive where he'll have one less thing to worry about going into next year, assuming. And I still think that that is the plan. Maybe if Jimmy goes and leads us to a Super Bowl win, you turn it on its head, but um, I think that that would be surprising to me. And as long as we win a Super Bowl, that's an acceptable trade. I would be a huge Jimmy fan for the rest of my life, as long as we win a Super Bowl because that's what it's all about. But I'd be surprised if this really changes the long term plan going forward. So to have Jimmy out of there next year, Jimmy kind of gets a farewell send off tour. I think it'll be interesting moving forward, and like you said, it could end up even being a good thing.
Yeah, it's hard because it's so fresh right now too. It's like, and I think that's why people were like, "Are you kidding me, Kyle? Like you kept running quarterback power." I felt like if we were going to run quarterback power, he was going to get hurt, which is fair. But I think like people are like, probably when Lamar came out, they're like, "Dude, if you keep running quarterback power with Lamar, Lamar's going to die." And it's like, well, Lamar still hasn't got hit like square up in the NFL, and it's been 4 years, 5 years. Like there are guys like that. Like, and another thing too is like we're talking about Trey Lance season-ending injury. You know who else has had a season-ending injury? Basically every single player in the history of the NFL. Like, dude, like who hasn't? Who has not had a season-ending injury? Rodgers, dude, Brady, Manning almost retired because of a neck injury. Like Andrew Luck retired early. Like, let's not act like injuries aren't a part of the game either. Like that is also something. What about Jimmy Garoppolo? How many times he got hurt and he's not? You're not running the football with him. Like, so I think it's tough. I think that's just kind of like a snap decision of like, oh, this is on Kyle. I think most people are blaming Kyle too. They didn't. Like I really do think that. And I think it's right how you're saying like how he's so scrutinized. And we've talked about this before, but 28-3. Yeah, guess what? It's partially on Kyle. You know who else it's on? Dan Quinn and the defense for allowing like 35 points in like 20 minutes. That's also kind of on them too. Like part of the game is setting stuff up. And if you talk to people that like if you ask people in the league, like coaches in the league, who's the best who's the best offensive mind? Who's one of the best head coaches? You know what Bill Belichick said? He said Kyle is the best guy outside of him. And that if he expected anyone to produce a dynasty outside of him, it would be Kyle. Dude, like, what do you guys want? Also, as Niner fans, bro, we've seen some bad teams, man. We have seen some bad teams outside of Harbaugh and the Shanahan years. We've seen coaching carousels. It has been an absolute mess since the Jerry Rice years, dude. Like, I don't know. So I don't get it at all. I think it's kind of crazy, but I'm totally with you in terms of that on kind of the blame game, I guess.